Their laughter cut through the room like shattered glass when I mentioned my business plans. My father didn't even look up from his plate, while my mother sighed that familiar, disappointed sigh. "Always chasing fantasies," my Uncle Paul announced, to the entire table. Just like when she was little. 20 pairs of eyes stared at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. They had already decided who I was and what I would become, but they hadn't seen my bank statement yet. They hadn't seen what happens when the family disappointment stops seeking approval and starts building an empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Evans family reunion invitation arrived in crisp cream cardstock, my name spelled correctly for once, Meredith Evans. Not Mary, as my grandmother insisted on calling me, not Mere, as my father abbreviated whenever he bothered to address me directly. The proper name my mother had given me before deciding I wasn't worth the full 3 syllables. I almost threw it away. 5 years had passed since I'd sat at a table with most of my extended family. 5 years of blessed distance, from the subtle cuts and not-so-subtle comparisons. 5 years of building something they couldn't begin to understand, because understanding would require them to see me as someone other than the disappointing middle child who never quite found her footing. The reunion was being held at my Aunt Catherine's sprawling lake house in Vermont, the family crown jewel that had featured in countless holiday photos and summer gatherings. A testament to what real success looked like according to the Evans family doctrine: corporate careers, sensible investments, retirement accounts that grew at predictable rates, and marriages to people with the right family backgrounds and professional credentials. "You don't have to go," said Zoe, my business partner and closest friend, watching me turn the invitation over in my hands. "Those people are toxic. You've spent years detoxing from them." "I know," I replied, still staring at the embossed lettering. "But part of me wants to see their faces when they realize I'm not who they think I am anymore." Zoe raised an eyebrow. Seeking validation from people who never gave it freely seems like a step backward. She was right, of course. The Meredith who had left that final family dinner 5 years ago, tears barely contained, shoulders hunched against the weight of their collective disappointment, had been seeking validation. The Meredith who now ran a thriving tech company, valued at 8 figures, didn't need their approval, but perhaps I needed closure. "Not validation," I corrected. "Reckoning." The 3 weeks before the reunion passed in a blur of investor meetings and product development milestones. Innovate Health, the healthcare technology platform I'd built from a concept everyone in my family had dismissed as unrealistic, was preparing to launch its 3rd major upgrade. Our user base had grown from a few hundred desperate rural clinics to a nationwide network of healthcare providers. The platform that began as my response to watching my grandfather die from a preventable medication interaction was now saving lives daily. Not that my family knew any of this. After years of their dismissal, I'd stopped sharing my professional journey with them. The less they knew, the less ammunition they had to use against me. My silence had been both self-protection and strategic choice. The morning of the reunion arrived with perfect weather, sunny and mild, the Vermont mountains providing a postcard backdrop for the family gathering. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple black dress that happened to be from a high-end designer, comfortable yet elegant flats, and my grandmother's pearls, the only inheritance I'd received, and a reminder that at least one person in the family had once believed in me. The drive to Lake Champlain gave me time to prepare mentally. I rehearsed brief, neutral responses to the inevitable questions. Yes, I'm still working on that computer thing. No, I'm not seeing anyone seriously. Yes, the apartment in Cambridge is working out fine. The less I revealed, the smoother the day would go. Aunt Catherine's house came into view as I rounded the final curve of the private road, a sprawling cedar and glass structure designed to maximize views of the lake while maintaining privacy from neighboring properties. The driveway was already lined with vehicles. My cousin Michael's Range Rover, Uncle Paul's vintage Jaguar, my sister Rebecca's practical but expensive hybrid SUV. I parked my modest sedan between them, suddenly conscious of how it might be perceived. Then I reminded myself that the car was a choice, not a limitation. I could have purchased any vehicle, but practicality had won out over ostentation. Another way I differed from the Evans family values. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the bottle of wine I'd brought, a small vineyard selection that cost more than most people would spend on a week's groceries, and walked toward the house. Through the massive windows, I could already see them gathered, 30-some family members spanning 3 generations, all cut from similar cloth despite their surface differences. My hand hesitated on the ornate brass door handle. Was I really ready for this? The answer didn't matter anymore as the door swung open from inside. "Meredith, you actually came." My cousin Emma stood in the doorway, genuine surprise evident in her expression. At 34, she remained the family golden child, successful attorney, married to a surgeon, mother of twin boys who already attended the right preschool. "I said I would," I replied, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "It's just that you've missed so many gatherings." She trailed off, her gaze sweeping over me with quick assessment. "You look well." "Thank you, so do you." The awkward pleasantries continued as Emma ushered me into the great room where the family had congregated. Conversations momentarily paused as heads turned toward the new arrival. My mother detached herself from a cluster of aunts, approaching with that characteristic mixture of obligation and reservation. "Meredith, we were beginning to think you might not come." She offered her cheek for the expected kiss, her perfume, exactly the same as it had been throughout my childhood, expensive, subtle, and slightly cold. "Traffic was heavier than expected," I lied smoothly. In truth, I had parked down the road for 20 minutes, gathering courage. "Well, you're here now. Your father's out on the deck with Paul and the boys. Rebecca and David brought the baby. She's napping upstairs." The clear prioritization of information. Father with the important men, successful sister with her perfect family, and me, the afterthought who had arrived late. The next hour passed in a blur of superficial conversations and subtle assessments. Yes, I was still single. No, I hadn't been to Europe this year, too busy with work. Yes, my apartment was still in Cambridge, not the more prestigious Back Bay, area where Rebecca and David had recently purchased a brownstone. I accepted a glass of wine and navigated the room carefully, exchanging pleasantries while revealing little. Uncle Paul cornered me near the appetizer table, martini in hand, his success worn as visibly as his expensive watch. "So, Meredith, still working on that app thing?" he asked, pronouncing app with the same tone someone might use for hobby. "The healthcare platform?" "Yes." "Brave of you to stick with it. Technology's a young man's game, though. Brutal burnout rate." He took a sip of his martini. "Your cousin Peter's firm is always looking for marketing people, you know. Something to keep in mind if you decide you want more stability." I smiled tightly. "I'll keep that in mind." The dinner bell saved me from further career counseling. We migrated to the enormous dining table overlooking the lake, place cards arranging us according to some family hierarchy I had never fully understood. I found myself between my cousin Emma's husband John and my grandfather's second wife, Sylvia, not quite exiled to the children's table, but certainly not placed among the family decision-makers clustered around my father at the table's head. The first course arrived, my aunt's famous lobster bisque, served in antique china bowls that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Conversation flowed around me. Rebecca's husband's recent promotion, my cousin Michael's new boat, my Aunt Linda's fundraising success for the symphony board. I ate quietly, responding when addressed directly, but otherwise content to observe. These gatherings had always followed the same pattern: achievements acknowledged, connections reinforced, subtle, competition disguised as support. The Evans family success template was clear and unwavering. Prestigious education, corporate advancement, strategic marriage, well-timed children, visible wealth appropriately displayed. My path had diverged from the template at every turn. State. University instead of Ivy League. Entrepreneurship instead of corporate ladder climbing. Independence instead of strategic marriage. No visible wealth because I'd reinvested nearly everything back into the company. By every Evans family metric, I was failing. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin, seasonal vegetables from local farms, wine pairings selected by my uncle who fancied himself a sommelier. As servers cleared the soup bowls and brought fresh plates, my father stood wine glass in hand, commanding immediate attention. "Before we continue with this wonderful meal," he began, using his boardroom voice, "I want to thank Catherine and Edward for hosting us in their beautiful home." Appreciative murmurs circled the table. Family gatherings like this become more precious as the years pass. Looking around, I see the legacy we're building together. His gaze moved around the table, acknowledging each family unit with a nod. My sister and her husband with their perfect baby upstairs, my cousins with their respective spouses and achievements, even distant relatives who had married well or chosen appropriate careers. His eyes skipped over me entirely. "The Evans family has always valued achievement, integrity, and practical wisdom," he continued. "I'm proud to see those values reflected in our children and grandchildren. Almost all of them," his omission implied. Glasses raised in response to his toast. I lifted mine mechanically, the expensive wine suddenly tasteless. "Speaking of achievements," my mother added when the toast concluded, "Rebecca and David have some news to share." My sister stood, her hand automatically finding her husband's shoulder. "We wanted the family to be the first to know," she began, her perfect smile firmly in place. "David's firm is opening a London office, and they've asked him to head it up. It's a 2-year assignment to start, with potential for permanent relocation." Exclamations of congratulations erupted around the table. London, the ultimate Evans family achievement, international career advancement. "And," Rebecca continued, once the initial reactions quieted, "we've just confirmed that we're expecting again. The baby will be born in London, a true international Evans." The noise level doubled. My mother's eyes glistened with tears of pride. My father beamed with satisfaction. The Evans family plan executed to perfection. Prestigious career advancement, coinciding with perfectly timed family expansion. "Meredith," my Aunt Catherine called from across the table, her voice carrying clearly through the excitement. "What about you, dear? Any exciting developments to share?" The table quieted. Attention, suddenly and uncomfortably redirected to me. I recognized the question for what it was. Not genuine interest, but a performative gesture of inclusion, expected to yield either nothing noteworthy or something they could later discuss with concerned expressions. "Actually," I began, suddenly tired of the charade. "Innovate Health is closing its Series C funding round next week. Significant expansion." Blank stares met my announcement. My cousin Emma's husband broke the silence. "Series C, that's venture capital terminology, right? Are you still trying to get investors for that healthcare app?" The condescension in his tone ignited something in me. 5 years of distance. 5 years of building something meaningful. While they traded country club memberships and vacation home recommendations. "Not trying," I corrected. "Succeeding. The platform currently serves over 2,000 healthcare providers nationwide. We're expanding internationally next quarter." My father frowned slightly. "That sounds ambitious, Meredith. The healthcare industry has significant regulatory barriers to international expansion." "We have regulatory teams in 4 countries already preparing the groundwork," I replied evenly. "The funding round is substantially oversubscribed." "What does that mean exactly?" My mother's question seemed genuinely confused rather than combative. It means, I explained, meeting her gaze directly, that we have more investors wanting to put money into the company than we have shares available at this round's valuation. Uncle Paul chuckled, the sound dismissive. Startup valuations are just paper money, Margaret. Nothing real until there's an exit. Remember that internet bubble? The platform processes over 12 million patient interactions monthly, I continued, ignoring his comment. We've reduced medication errors by 68% in participating rural hospitals. That's nice, my Aunt Catherine offered vaguely. Is it making any actual money, though? These internet things burn through cash, don't they? The question hung in the air, the perfect encapsulation of what the family believed about my career choice. A charitable hobby at best, a delusional waste at worst. I placed my napkin beside my plate and reached for my purse hanging on the chair back. The decision crystallized in that moment. Not planned, but suddenly absolutely necessary. You know what? I think it's time we cleared this up once and for all. I withdrew my phone and opened my banking app, then pulled up the most recent statement for my personal account. Not the corporate accounts, not the investment portfolio, just my everyday banking. I stood, walked deliberately to where my father sat, and placed the phone in front of him. This is what making actual money looks like, Dad. His expression shifted as he registered the number. Confusion, disbelief, then something I'd never seen directed at me before. Shock tinged with respect. This is your account? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. My personal checking account. Just the liquid assets I keep available for regular expenses. He handed the phone back wordlessly. I didn't return to my seat, but instead remained standing, suddenly aware that I had the entire family's undivided attention for perhaps the first time in my life. For 5 years, I've listened to variations of the same message from this family, that my choices were impractical, that my business was a fantasy, that I wasn't living in the real world. I looked around the table, meeting their eyes one by one. The reality is that I built something valuable while all of you were dismissing it. The platform that began because our healthcare system failed, Grandpa now helps protect millions of patients. My mother's expression tightened. Meredith, this isn't the appropriate... Let her speak, Margaret. My father's interruption silenced the table. He was studying me with new eyes, reassessing. Go on. The truth is, I stopped sharing my professional journey with this family because you'd already decided it wasn't valid. You measured success by metrics that mattered to you: prestige, visibility, conformity to expectation. I chose different metrics: impact, innovation, independence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Uncle Paul cleared his throat. Clearly, we've underestimated your venture. But business success can be temporary, especially in technology. The Evans family approach has proven stable for generations. I smiled at him, genuinely this time. You're absolutely right, Uncle Paul. Success can be temporary. That's why I've diversified. The platform's intellectual property alone is valued at over 9 figures. We're partnering with 3 of the largest healthcare systems in the country. And yes, I could buy a house on this lake if I wanted to. Probably several. The silence that followed was profound. My sister Rebecca was the first to break it, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity I hadn't heard from her in years. Why didn't you tell us any of this before? The question surprised me with its simplicity and its complexity. Why? Hadn't I? The answer formed itself as I spoke. Because I needed to build it for myself, not for your approval. Because every time I shared a dream or goal with this family, it was dissected and dismissed. At some point, I stopped seeking validation from people who couldn't see my vision. I returned to my seat, suddenly aware that I had delivered the reckoning I'd come for. It hadn't arrived as imagined, not a triumphant announcement or perfectly crafted revelation, but a raw moment of truth that couldn't be denied or diminished. Conversation resumed gradually, but with a different quality. Questions directed to me now carried genuine interest rather than patronizing concern. My father's gaze returned to me repeatedly throughout the remainder of the meal, reassessing the daughter he had categorized and dismissed for decades. Dessert arrived. My aunt's famous apple tart with homemade vanilla ice cream. As servers distributed the plates, my cousin Michael raised his glass. "I think we need another toast," he announced. "To Meredith, whose success reminds us that innovation often looks like impracticality until it changes the world. The Evans family has a tech visionary in its ranks, and we completely missed it." Glasses raised around the table. The acknowledgement felt surprisingly empty compared to what I had imagined all these years. Not because it wasn't genuine, but because I suddenly realized how little I needed it. As the evening progressed and the family dispersed into smaller, conversational groups, my father approached where I stood on the deck, overlooking the moonlit lake. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said quietly, coming to stand beside me at the railing. "He always said you had a different kind of intelligence than the rest of us. I didn't understand what he meant until tonight." I turned to study him. The strong profile now softened by age, the authoritative bearing that had shaped my childhood perception of success. Grandpa encouraged me when no one else did. He used to say that the family recipe for success wasn't the only way to bake the cake. A smile touched my father's lips. "That sounds like him. He built his success differently than his father, too. The family narrative sometimes oversimplifies our history." The admission surprised me. My father had always seemed the ultimate Evans success story: Harvard Business School, corporate leadership, community recognition. The perfect execution of the family template. I never knew that. "There are many things you don't know, Meredith. Perhaps that's partly my fault." He hesitated, then added, "I would like to learn more about your company. Not to judge or advise, just to understand what you've built." The offer hung between us. Not quite an apology, not exactly reconciliation, but an opening where there had been only closed doors before. "I'd like that," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. "But I need you to understand something, Dad. I didn't build Innovate Health to prove you wrong or to earn your approval. I built it because it needed to exist." He nodded slowly. "That's probably why it succeeded, where so many ventures fail. Purpose outlasts pride or rebellion." We stood in companionable silence, watching the moonlight on the water. The revelation at dinner had changed something fundamental, not just in how my family perceived me, but in how I perceived myself in relation to them. I had come seeking a reckoning, but found something more valuable: freedom from needing their validation at all. Later that night, as I drove back to my hotel, I realized that the most significant achievement hadn't been building a successful company or accumulating wealth that impressed even my status-conscious family. The real success was becoming someone who no longer needed to prove herself to people who had decided her limitations before she had discovered her strengths. The bank statement had silenced the room, but the journey to creating that bank statement had transformed me in ways no number could reflect, and that was the story they still couldn't fully see or understand. Perhaps they never would, and for the first time, I was completely at peace with that reality. As the miles passed and Vermont's mountains gave way to rolling hills, I made a mental note to call Zoe in the morning. We had work to do. Important. Work that was changing healthcare delivery for millions of people. The Evans family approval was never what made that work matter. It was simply a chapter in a much larger story. My story, that was still being written, one innovation at a time. The morning after the reunion, I woke in my hotel room with a strange mixture of emotions. The confrontation I had anticipated, For years had finally occurred, but its aftermath felt hollow compared to the vindication I had imagined. The family's newfound respect seemed insignificant against the backdrop of what I had built without their support or understanding. I checked my phone to find several messages already waiting. Zoe confirming our investor meeting for the following day. My development team with updates on the international compliance modules. 3 LinkedIn connection requests from cousins who had barely acknowledged my career path at previous gatherings. And a text from my father. Breakfast at the Lakeside Cafe at 9? Just the 2 of us. The invitation surprised me. Throughout my childhood and early adulthood, one-on-one time with my father had been rare and typically reserved for discussions of my shortcomings. Our relationship had always existed within the framework of family gatherings or formal occasions, never in the casual intimacy of a breakfast meeting without agenda or audience. I texted back a simple, "See you then," and began preparing for the day, my mind drifting back to where this journey had truly begun. Not with the dramatic revelation at last night's dinner, but with a quiet conversation 5 years earlier that had altered my life's trajectory. The Lakeside Cafe occupied a charming converted boathouse at the marina, its wooden deck extending over the water. I arrived a few minutes early to find my father already seated at a corner table, reading something. On his tablet with the focused concentration that characterized his approach to everything. He looked up as I approached, setting the device aside with deliberate attention that signaled I had his full focus. Another rarity in our history. "I took the liberty of ordering coffee," he said, gesturing to the French press on the table. "They make it properly here." "Thank you." I poured a cup, studying him over the rim. In the morning light, he looked older than he had at dinner. The lines around his eyes deeper, the silver at his temples more pronounced. Success had exacted its own price, just less visibly than failure. We exchanged pleasantries about the quality of the coffee, the perfect weather, the charm of the location, the practiced social dialogue of near strangers finding safe conversational ground. "I've been reading about Innovate Health this morning," he said finally, tapping his tablet. "The industry coverage is impressive. Several healthcare journals have highlighted your work on rural access points." I nodded, surprised that he had taken the initiative to research my company. The rural access module was our first major breakthrough. Small hospitals and clinics were being overwhelmed by the regulatory and documentation requirements of modern healthcare. We created a system that reduced administrative burden while improving patient safety. "Because of what happened to Dad," he acknowledged, referencing my grandfather. "That was the catalyst, yes." I felt a familiar ache at the memory. If the systems had been talking to each other, if the medication interactions had been flagged properly, he might have had years. More. My father studied me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "You know, I never made the connection between his death and your business focus. I thought your interest in healthcare technology was just another in a series of temporary enthusiasms." The assessment stung despite its delivery as a realization rather than criticism. "You never asked why I was passionate about it," I pointed out. "You just dismissed it as impractical." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Fair point. I made assumptions based on patterns I thought I recognized." The server arrived to take our breakfast orders, providing a brief respite from the increasingly weighted conversation. Once she departed, my father leaned forward slightly, his expression more open than I had seen it in years. "Tell me how it started. Not the company specifications I read about this morning, but your journey. The parts I missed while I was busy judging instead of listening." The request caught me off guard. In all our previous interactions, my father had offered opinions, advice, corrections, never simply asked me to tell my story on my own terms. For a moment, I considered deflecting, protecting the narrative I had built without his input or approval. But something in his genuine interest made me reconsider. It started the day after Grandpa's funeral, I began, the memory surfacing with unexpected clarity. Everyone was at the house, discussing the will and making arrangements for Grandma. You were in Dad's study with Uncle Paul and the lawyer. I overheard you talking about how the medication mix-up was unfortunate, but just one of those things that happens in complex healthcare situations. My father nodded slowly, remembering. Paul's son-in-law is a physician. He was explaining how overloaded the systems are, how human error is inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, I said, the old frustration resurfacing. It was a systems failure. Grandpa's primary care doctor prescribed something that interacted dangerously with what his cardiologist had prescribed 3 weeks earlier. Neither physician knew about the other's prescription because the electronic records didn't communicate properly. It wasn't human error. It was design failure. I paused as the server returned with our food. Vegetable frittata for him, blueberry pancakes for me. The familiar breakfast choices from decades of family vacations. That afternoon, I continued after she left, while everyone was engaged, in legal discussions, I started researching medical errors. Did you know they're the third leading cause of death in this country? More people die from healthcare system failures than from most diseases we spend billions trying to cure. I didn't know that, he admitted, cutting his frittata into precise sections. Neither did I until I started looking. And the most frustrating part was that many of these deaths are preventable with existing technology. The solutions existed in fragments: good electronic record systems, medication interaction databases, diagnostic support tools, but they didn't work together seamlessly, especially for smaller providers who couldn't afford enterprise-level systems. My father listened without interruption as I described the months of research that followed. Interviews with rural healthcare providers, consultations with medical informatics experts, nights spent teaching myself enough about healthcare data, protocols to understand the technical challenges. I tried talking to you about it once, I reminded him. At Rebecca's engagement party. You told me healthcare IT was dominated by massive corporations with decades of experience and billions in development resources. You said it was naive to think a small startup could compete in that space. He winced slightly at the reminder. I remember that conversation differently. I thought I was offering practical guidance about market realities. You were sharing facts without context, I corrected. Yes, huge corporations dominated the space, and they were failing smaller providers spectacularly. Their systems were designed for major medical centers with dedicated IT departments and 7-figure technology budgets. I described how that realization had become the foundation for Innovate Health's approach, creating a platform specifically designed for resource-limited healthcare settings, built from the ground up to be intuitive, interoperable, and affordable. The big players were trying to scale down complex systems for smaller providers, I explained. We built something right-sized from the beginning, designed around the actual workflows of rural clinics and community hospitals. And the initial funding, my father asked. Venture capital from the start? I hesitated, then decided complete honesty served the moment. Grandma's inheritance. The $50,000 she left me that everyone thought I would waste on another impractical venture. His eyebrows rose slightly. $50,000 isn't much for technology development. It was enough to build the first prototype and demonstrate proof of concept. I lived on ramen and worked out of my apartment to stretch it as long as possible. I smiled at the memory of those lean but purposeful months. By the time the money ran out, we had a working demo that secured our seed funding. He questioned. You had partners? Zoe joined 3 months in. She was working for one of the healthcare giants, frustrated by how their systems were failing smaller providers. When she saw our prototype, she left her 6-figure corporate job to join me for equity and a stipend that barely covered her rent. Recognition flickered in my father's eyes. Zoe Chen? The woman who introduced you at the Healthcare Innovation Awards last year? I saw the live stream. The admission stunned me. You watched that? He nodded, looking somewhat self-conscious. I've followed your public appearances, read the articles when your name appeared in industry publications. Not closely enough to understand what you were building, apparently, but I kept track. The revelation shifted something in my perception of our estrangement. While I had assumed complete disinterest from my family, my father had been peripherally monitoring my journey, not engaging, not supporting, but not entirely dismissing it either. Why didn't you ever mention it? I asked. He considered the question carefully before answering. Pride, partly. Our last real conversation about your business plans ended with me telling you that you were making a mistake. To acknowledge your growing success would mean admitting I had been wrong. He paused, then added, and I suppose I was waiting for you to share your achievements with the family willingly, not realizing that we had created an environment where you felt that was impossible. The honest self-assessment was so uncharacteristic of my father that I found myself momentarily speechless. In the silence, he continued, Your grandfather used to say that I had confused strong opinions with wisdom, that I had mistaken certainty for clarity. A rueful smile crossed his features. He was right, as usual. Grandpa understood me better than anyone in the family, I acknowledged. He never dismissed my ideas, even when they seemed disconnected from conventional paths. He asked questions instead of offering judgments. A skill I never mastered, my father admitted. I built my career on decisiveness and clear direction. Those traits served me well in business, but perhaps less so in family matters. Our conversation shifted to specific aspects of Innovate Health's development, the technical challenges we'd overcome, the resistance we'd encountered from entrenched interests, the breakthrough moment when our first major hospital system adopted the platform and documented a 40% reduction in adverse medication events within 6 months. As he asked increasingly insightful questions about the business model and growth strategy, I recognized the executive mind that had built his own successful career, now engaging with my work as a peer rather than a skeptical parent. The sensation was both foreign and surprisingly gratifying. The Series C funding, he said as we finished our meal, referring to the investment round I had mentioned at dinner. That puts you in position for significant expansion or potential acquisition offers. What's your long-term vision? The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than the implied criticism I would have expected in earlier years. I found myself sharing the authentic answer I typically reserved for conversations with Zoe and my executive team. We're not building to sell. The healthcare technology space is dominated by acquisition and consolidation, which is partly why innovation stagnates. We're creating an independent platform that prioritizes patient safety and provider usability over quarterly profit targets. I paused, then added, That approach limits certain exit strategies, but aligns with why we started this in the first place, to prevent what happened to Grandpa from happening to others. My father nodded slowly, processing this perspective that ran counter to traditional business wisdom about maximizing shareholder returns through strategic exits. That's a choice with significant financial implications. It is, I acknowledged. We've turned down 3 acquisition offers in the past 18 months, all at valuations that would have made everyone involved very wealthy. But wealth was never the primary goal. Purpose over profit, he mused. Your grandfather would approve. The observation startled me. You make it sound like Grandpa wasn't focused on financial success. He built one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Northeast. My father's expression softened with memory. He built a company that reflected his values, and its financial success followed. He turned down numerous opportunities to maximize short-term profits when they conflicted with his commitment to his workers and community. The family mythology sometimes simplifies his story to fit our preferred narrative about practical success. This version of my grandfather aligned with the man I had known, but contradicted the family's typical invocation of his legacy as justification for conventional paths and practical choices. Before I could explore this revelation further, my father glanced at his watch. "I have a flight back to Boston this afternoon," he said, signaling for the check. "But I'd like to continue this conversation. Perhaps you could visit when you're next in the city." The invitation carried weight beyond its simple words, an acknowledgement that our relationship had potential worth cultivating outside the constraining context of family gatherings. As we walked back toward the parking area, he hesitated, then spoke with careful precision. "I owe you an apology, Meredith, not just for underestimating your business acumen, but for failing to recognize your vision when it didn't match my predefined conception of success." He met my gaze directly. "Your grandfather would be extraordinarily proud of what you've built. So am I, for whatever that's worth after all this time." The words I had once longed to hear now arrived when I no longer needed them for validation. Yet, they carried a different value in their belated delivery. Not as external approval of my worth, but as the potential foundation for a more authentic relationship going forward. "Thank you," I replied simply. "That means something, even now." We parted with an awkward embrace that held more warmth than any interaction we had shared in years. As I watched him walk toward his rental car, I reflected on how dramatically my relationship with my family had shifted in less than 24 hours. Not because I had changed, but because their perception had finally caught up with the reality I had been living for years. On the drive back to Boston that afternoon, I called Zoe to brief her on the family dinner revelation and the unexpected breakfast with my father. "So they finally see you," she remarked after I recounted the events. "Only took building a multi-million-dollar company to get their attention." "That's the strange part," I replied, watching Vermont's green landscape flow past my window. "Now that they see me, I realize how little I need them to. The validation I spent years craving feels almost irrelevant compared to what we've actually accomplished." "That's called growth," Zoe observed with characteristic directness. "You stopped needing external validation somewhere along the way, and didn't even notice the transition." Her assessment resonated with surprising accuracy. The journey that had begun as a dual mission, to create technology that prevented medical errors like the one that claimed my grandfather, and to prove my worth to a family that had dismissed my potential, had evolved into something purer. Somewhere between the sleepless nights coding our first prototype and the exhilaration of seeing the platform save its first documented life, external validation had ceased to be a driving force. "Speaking of accomplishments," Zoe continued, shifting to business matters, "the Johns Hopkins team wants to move up the integration timeline. Their CMO called this morning. They're seeing promising early results from the pilot units and want to accelerate full implementation." The news redirected my focus to the work that mattered, not the family drama of the previous evening, but the real-world impact our technology was having in healthcare settings across the country. By the time I reached Boston, I had conducted 3 video calls, reviewed integration protocols for the Johns Hopkins expansion, and approved the final presentation for tomorrow's investor meeting. That evening, alone in my Cambridge apartment with its view of the Charles River, I found myself reflecting on the 5-year journey from disinherited family disappointment to successful entrepreneur. The path had not been linear or easily navigated. There had been moments of crushing doubt, technical failures that seemed insurmountable, financial pressures that kept me awake at night worrying about making payroll for the growing team that depended on my leadership. What had sustained me through those challenges wasn't the desire to prove my family wrong, though that motivation had provided initial fuel. It was the clarity of purpose that emerged from my grandfather's unnecessary death, the conviction that healthcare technology could and should work better, especially for the most vulnerable patients and resource-limited providers. I opened my laptop and pulled up the photograph I kept on my desktop. Not a family portrait or personal memento, but an image taken at a small rural hospital in western Pennsylvania, the first facility to fully implement our platform. The medical staff stood proudly in front of their modest building, holding a hand-painted banner thanking Innovate Health for helping us provide safer care for our community. That image, far more than my bank statement or my family's belated recognition, represented the true measure of what we had built. The purpose that had emerged from pain. The vision that had materialized from frustration. The company that had grown from one granddaughter's determination to prevent others from experiencing her family's loss. As I prepared for the next day's investor meeting, I realized that the most valuable inheritance my grandfather had left me wasn't the $50,000 that seeded my company. It was the example of someone who built success on his own terms, guided by values rather than conventions. A truth about him the family narrative had conveniently adjusted to fit their preferred template for achievement. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Proud of our conversation this morning. Let me know when you're next in Boston." A simple message that acknowledged our fragile reconnection without presuming too much. 5 years ago, such recognition would have seemed like the ultimate victory. Now it registered as a pleasant but non-essential development in a life defined by larger purpose and achievement. The validation I had once craved from my family paled in comparison to the impact metrics that tracked lives improved and harmful errors prevented by our technology. The bank statement had silenced the room at dinner. But the true triumph wasn't in the zeros it contained. It was in the journey that had transformed me from someone seeking approval to someone creating tangible value in the world. That transformation, invisible on any financial statement, represented the richest reward of all. 2 months after the family reunion, I found myself sitting in the sleek conference room of our Cambridge headquarters, surrounded by the leadership team that had helped build Innovate Health from concept to thriving enterprise. The autumn rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our most difficult strategy meeting to date. "The acquisition offer from Medcore Systems is significantly higher than their previous attempt," said Nadeem, our chief financial officer, displaying the latest figures on the main screen. 40% premium over current valuation, guaranteed positions for the executive team, and operational autonomy for at least 3 years. Zoe, seated to my right as always, tapped her pen against her notepad. Operational autonomy until they've extracted every bit of our intellectual property and integrated it into their ecosystem. Then we become another abandoned acquisition, our technology diluted into their bloated platform. "That's cynical," countered Julian, our head of business development. Medcore has maintained several of their acquisitions as distinct brands. Their CEO specifically mentioned our rural focus as something they want to preserve. "Their CEO says whatever will close the deal," Zoe replied with characteristic bluntness. "Remember health first?" Medcore promised to maintain their community health focus post-acquisition. 18 months later, they'd gutted the platform and rolled the technology into their enterprise offering at price points small clinics couldn't possibly afford. The discussion continued around the table, perspectives divided between those who saw the acquisition offer as a triumphant validation of our work and those who viewed it as a threat to our founding mission. As founder and CEO, the final decision ultimately rested with me, though I had always led Innovate Health through collaborative consensus rather than executive decree. I studied the faces of the team members who had believed in our vision enough to join, when we could offer little more than purpose and potential. Nadeem, who had left a prestigious position at a major investment bank to become our CFO when we could barely pay him half his previous salary. Elena, our brilliant head of product, who had declined multiple offers from Silicon Valley giants to build technology that served rural communities like the one she grew up in. Julian, whose network and business acumen had opened doors that would have remained closed to us otherwise. "Let's step back from the financial aspects for a moment," I suggested, redirecting the conversation. Our mission statement is prominently displayed in the lobby of this building, creating healthcare technology that serves all patients, especially those most overlooked by existing systems. How does this acquisition align with that core purpose? The question shifted the energy in the room, bringing us back to the fundamental considerations that had guided our most important decisions from the beginning. For the next hour, we examined the acquisition offer not just through the lens of financial benefit, but through its potential impact on our users, the rural hospitals, community clinics, and underserved populations that had been our focus from day one. By meeting's end, we had reached a tentative consensus to decline Medcore's offer, our third rejection of acquisition overtures in 2 years. The decision wasn't unanimous, with valid concerns raised about competitive pressures and market consolidation. But the majority recognized that our independence remained essential to fulfilling our mission, especially as we prepared to expand our platform internationally. As the team filed out to return to their respective departments, Zoe remained behind, her expression reflecting the complex mixture of pride and concern I was feeling myself. "That wasn't easy," she observed once we were alone. Julian made compelling points about market realities. "He did," I acknowledged, "and he's not wrong about the challenges ahead. Medcore's resources would certainly accelerate some aspects of our development roadmap. But at what cost?" Zoe's question echoed my own internal deliberation. We didn't build this to become another absorption target for healthcare IT consolidation. We built it to change how healthcare technology serves vulnerable populations. I nodded, moving to the window to watch the rain transform the Cambridge streets below. My grandfather used to say that the most important decisions aren't between good and bad options. Those are easy. They're between different kinds of good, with different kinds of cost. "Speaking of family wisdom," Zoe said, her tone shifting slightly, "how are things progressing with your father since the big revelation?" The question was relevant beyond personal interest. My father had recently expressed interest in potentially investing in our upcoming expansion round, blurring the once clear lines between my family and professional worlds. "Cautiously evolving," I replied honestly. "We've had dinner twice since the reunion. He's making genuine efforts to understand the business and my vision for it. It's unfamiliar territory for both of us." "And his interest in investing? Have you decided how to handle that?" I turned from the window to face her. "I'm conflicted. Part of me appreciates the symbolic vote of confidence after years of dismissal. Another part worries about introducing family dynamics into our capitalization structure, especially given our history." "Valid concerns on both sides," Zoe acknowledged. "Though I'd note that you're approaching this decision with far more thoughtfulness than he approached supporting your initial vision." Her observation made me smile despite the weight of the pending decisions. "True. Perhaps that's growth on both our parts." After Zoe departed for her afternoon meetings, I remained in the conference room, reviewing the Medcore acquisition documents one more time. The offer was objectively excellent in financial terms, a testament to what we had built and its perceived value in the marketplace. Accepting would instantaneously convert my ownership stake into wealth beyond anything I had imagined when we launched with my grandmother's modest inheritance. Yet something fundamental would be lost in that transaction, not just operational. Independence, but the purpose-driven culture we had so carefully cultivated. The ability to prioritize impact over quarterly earnings expectations. The freedom to serve healthcare providers who couldn't afford the premium prices that drove the industry's typical profit margins. My phone chimed with a text from Dr. Abernathy, the chief medical officer at a small hospital in rural Minnesota that had been among our first significant clients. Patient safety incident rates down 72% year over year. Board meeting today, reviewing the numbers. Thank you for creating technology that works for hospitals like ours. These messages arrived regularly, evidence that our work was fulfilling its intended purpose. No acquisition premium could replace the satisfaction of knowing we were preventing tragedies like the one that had claimed my grandfather's life. I closed the acquisition folder and left the conference room. Decision confirmed. As I walked through our open office space toward my modest corner workspace, We had deliberately avoided extravagant executive offices to maintain our collaborative culture. I felt a renewed appreciation for the team busily advancing our mission on all fronts. Engineers were coding new interoperability features to connect our platform with legacy systems still used in many rural facilities. Product designers were refining user interfaces based on feedback from nurses working in high-stress environments. Our regulatory compliance team was preparing documentation for the international expansion that would bring our safety protocols to healthcare systems beyond U.S. borders. This vibrant ecosystem of purpose-driven innovation was what MedCore wanted to purchase. But its true value couldn't be captured in financial statements or acquisition agreements. It existed in the shared commitment to creating technology that served people often forgotten by market-driven development priorities. The calm certainty I felt about declining the acquisition offer persisted through that afternoon's meetings and into the evening. But at 9:47 p.m., just as I was preparing to leave the office, everything changed with a single phone call. Meredith Evans? The unfamiliar voice carried the unmistakable gravity of someone delivering unwelcome news. Yes, speaking. This is Sandra Miller from Boston Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Richard Evans. He's been admitted following a cardiac event. He's currently in surgery, but he asked that we contact you immediately. World seemed to narrow around me, external sounds fading as the implications registered. My father, the seemingly invincible patriarch who had dominated my perception of success and failure throughout my life, was suddenly, critically vulnerable. I'm on my way, I said, already gathering my belongings. Please tell the surgical team I'm coming. I'll be there within 20 minutes. The drive to Boston Memorial passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and competing thoughts. Our complicated relationship. The tentative reconnection of recent months. The unresolved tensions that might now remain permanently unaddressed. The hospital's cardiac center occupied a modern wing with its own entrance. As I hurried through the sliding doors, I was struck by the sterile efficiency of the environment. So different from the community hospitals whose needs had inspired Innovate Health's development. Here, cutting-edge technology and ample resources created a healthcare experience unrecognizable to much of rural America. At the surgical waiting area, I found my mother and sister already present, their expressions reflecting the shock of the situation. Rebecca rose immediately, embracing me with unexpected warmth. The surgeon came out about 10 minutes ago, she said as we separated. Dad's still in surgery, but they've stabilized him. Significant blockage in 2 coronary arteries. They're placing stents now. My mother remained seated, her perfect posture intact despite the circumstances. He was at a business dinner when it happened. Thankfully, one of his colleagues recognized the symptoms immediately and called 911. I took the seat across from her, noting the subtle signs of strain beneath. Her composed exterior, the slight tremor in her hands, the unusual disorder of her normally immaculate hair. Have they given any indication about his prognosis? I asked. They're cautiously optimistic, Rebecca replied. The paramedics responded quickly, and he was conscious when they brought him in. The cardiology team says that's generally a positive sign. The next 2 hours passed in that peculiar hospital time, simultaneously crawling and racing as we waited for updates. My mother maintained mostly silence, occasionally answering text messages from concerned relatives. Rebecca alternated between pacing the waiting area and making necessary calls to our father's executive assistant and close colleagues. I found myself observing the cardiac unit's technological environment with professional interest despite the personal circumstances, noting the integration challenges between monitoring systems, the workflow inefficiencies in the nursing station's computer setup, the redundant documentation processes that pulled clinical staff away from direct patient care. Even in crisis, I couldn't help seeing healthcare settings through the lens of systems that could work better, could serve patients and providers more effectively. It was this perspective, so often dismissed by my family as impractical fixation, that had ultimately created the success they now acknowledged. At 12:43 a.m., the cardiac surgeon emerged, still in surgical attire but with mask removed. Dr. Elijah Chen introduced himself with the practiced compassion of someone accustomed to delivering life-altering information to anxious families. Mr. Evans came through the procedure well, he began, offering the critical information first. We placed 2 stents to address significant blockages in the left anterior descending and circumflex arteries. He's stable and being moved to cardiac recovery now. The collective relief in our small group was palpable. My mother closed her eyes briefly, composure momentarily broken by visible gratitude. Rebecca squeezed my hand. "When can we see him?" my mother asked, voice steadier than might be expected under the circumstances. "He'll be in recovery for about an hour, then transferred to the cardiac care unit. 1 visitor at a time will be permitted once he's settled there." Dr. Chen hesitated briefly, then added, "He specifically asked that Meredith be informed when he could receive visitors." The statement hung in the air, its significance unmistakable. My mother's expression flickered with something complicated: surprise, perhaps mild hurt, but also understanding. She nodded slightly. "Of course," she said. "Meredith should go first." The unexpected deference to what would have once been considered my lower position in the family hierarchy reflected how dramatically our dynamics had shifted since the reunion revelation. My sister showed no sign of objection either, simply offering practical suggestions about coordinating our presence at the hospital over the coming days. At 2:17 a.m., a cardiac care nurse appeared to escort me to my father's room. She provided a brief orientation to the monitoring equipment and call system before leaving me alone with him. The sight was jarring. My father, diminished by hospital, garb and medical apparatus, looking suddenly mortal in ways I had never considered. His complexion was pale, his breathing assisted by oxygen delivered through a nasal cannula. Various monitors tracked his vital functions, their steady rhythms, the only sound in the otherwise quiet room. I approached cautiously, uncertain if he was conscious until his eyes opened at my movement. Recognition registered immediately, followed by a weak attempt at his characteristic authoritative smile. "Meredith," he said, voice raspy but clear. "Good. They found you." "I came as soon as they called," I assured him, taking the chair beside his bed. "The surgeon says the procedure went well. 2 stents. He nodded slightly. "Blockages. Should have seen the warning signs earlier." "You'll need to make some lifestyle changes," I said, falling into the practical problem-solving approach that was our shared language. "Cardiac rehabilitation, stress management, dietary adjustments." "Already lectured by 3 different medical professionals," he replied with a shadow of his dry humor. "But yes, changes required." He paused, seeming to gather strength before continuing. Life has a way of enforcing reflection at inconvenient moments. The philosophical observation was uncharacteristic of my typically pragmatic father. I attributed it to medication and the profound disorientation of sudden health crises. "Mom and Rebecca are here too," I offered. "They can come in once we're finished talking." He nodded acknowledgement, then surprised me by reaching for my hand. The gesture was so unfamiliar, physical affection had never been part of our relationship, that I momentarily hesitated before accepting the connection. "I asked for you first because there are things I need to say," he began, each word deliberate. "Things that shouldn't wait for more convenient timing." "Dad, you don't need to—" "I do," he interrupted with a remnant of his executive authority. "When they were putting me in the ambulance, I had this moment of absolute clarity about what matters and what doesn't, about mistakes I've made that can still be addressed and those that can't." I remained silent, recognizing the importance of whatever he was struggling to communicate. "I was wrong about you, Meredith. Not just about your business acumen or vision, which you've proven beyond question, but about who you are fundamentally." His grip on my hand tightened slightly. I tried to shape you according to my limited understanding of success, never recognizing that you were defining something more meaningful on your own terms. The admission, delivered in the vulnerable setting of a post-surgical recovery room, without audience or agenda, carried authenticity that no public acknowledgement could have matched. I nearly missed witnessing who you've become, he continued, because I was too invested in who I thought you should be. That would have been my loss, not yours. I felt unexpected emotion rising in my throat. We're finding new ground now, I offered. The past few months have been different. Not different enough, he countered with surprising insight. I've been playing catch-up, trying to understand what you've built without fully acknowledging how I contributed to making that journey more difficult than it needed to be. The monitoring equipment continued its steady digital accompaniment to this unprecedented conversation. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, all rendered in clinical data points, while something less measurable but equally vital was being recalibrated between us. When your grandfather was my age, my father said after a thoughtful pause, he told me something I dismissed as sentimental philosophy. He said that real success isn't measured by what you accumulate or achieve, but by whether your presence in others' lives makes their journey easier or harder. A rueful smile crossed his features. I thought I knew better. Tonight's events suggest otherwise. I struggled to reconcile this reflective, vulnerable version of my father with the unyielding arbiter of worthiness who had shaped so much of my self-perception. Was this transformation genuine insight or merely the temporary perspective shift that often accompanies health crises? Dad, you should rest, I suggested gently. We can continue this conversation when you're stronger. He shook his head with mild frustration. That's exactly the thinking I'm rejecting. The assumption that there will always be time later to address what matters. His gaze held mine with surprising intensity given his condition. I'm proud of you, Meredith. Not because you proved me wrong, but because you remained true to your vision when doing so was lonely and difficult. That kind of integrity is rarer and more valuable than the conventional success I've pursued. The words I had once craved now arrived in this unexpected setting, carrying a weight and authenticity I could never have anticipated. This wasn't the calculated acknowledgement of a patriarch forced to recognize achievement that could no longer be denied. This was genuine recognition from a father confronting his own mortality and reassessing what truly mattered. Thank you, I said simply, knowing that elaborate response would diminish the moment's significance. We sat in companionable silence. For several minutes, the medical monitors providing rhythmic background to unspoken understanding. When my father spoke again, he had shifted to practical matters with characteristic resilience. I've been giving serious thought to your international expansion plans, he said, voice stronger than before. The regulatory challenges in European markets are significant, but your platform's focus on patient safety creates a compelling compliance narrative. The transition from personal revelation to business strategy might have seemed jarring, but I recognized it as my father's way of moving forward, acknowledging emotional terrain while returning to the structured problem-solving approach that defined his professional success. For the next 15 minutes, we discussed Innovate Health's expansion strategy, potential regulatory hurdles, and market differentiation opportunities. Despite his medical condition, my father's analytical mind remained sharp, offering insights that reflected his decades of business experience while respecting the unique aspects of our healthcare technology focus. When the cardiac nurse returned to suggest concluding the visit, my father surprised me once more. I'd like to introduce you to Malcolm Thompson next week, assuming my recovery progresses as expected, he said. He's heading a healthcare initiative through the Evans Foundation, focusing on technology access for underserved communities. There might be alignment opportunities worth exploring. The Evans Foundation was my father's philanthropic organization, established 15 years earlier, but operated entirely separately from his interactions with family. That he was suggesting professional collaboration between his foundation and Innovate Health represented yet another boundary shift in our evolving relationship. "I'd be interested in learning more," I replied, careful not to overcommit without proper due diligence, regardless of family connection. As I prepared to leave so my mother could visit, my father caught my hand once more. "One last thing, Meredith. Whatever happens with potential foundation collaboration or any other business matter, know that my respect for what you've built stands independent of any shared ventures. You've earned that recognition entirely on your own terms." The clarification that his professional respect wasn't contingent on my accepting his assistance or involvement demonstrated unexpected insight into concerns I hadn't voiced. Perhaps his near miss with mortality had indeed crystallized understanding that had previously eluded him. Over the following weeks, my father's recovery progressed steadily. The cardiac event that might have been catastrophic had instead become transformative, not just in his physical health management, but in his approach to family relationships and priorities. True to his word, he introduced me to Malcolm Thompson, the Evans Foundation's Healthcare Initiative Director. Our initial meeting revealed genuine alignment between the Foundation's goals and Innovate Health's capabilities, particularly regarding international expansion to underserved regions. The Foundation has established relationships with healthcare ministries in several African nations, Malcolm explained during our second planning session. They need exactly the kind of lightweight, interoperable solutions your platform provides, but affordable deployment has been the consistent barrier. Affordability in developing regions requires rethinking the entire pricing model, I acknowledged. We've been exploring tiered approaches based on regional economic factors, but implementation costs remain challenging. My father, present, but deliberately taking a secondary role in the discussion, offered a perspective that demonstrated how seriously he had been considering the issue. The Foundation could potentially underwrite implementation costs through our existing grant structures, he suggested, creating a public-private partnership model that makes the technology accessible without compromising Innovate Health sustainability. The proposal was elegantly practical, respecting both the Foundation's philanthropic mission and our company's business realities. It represented the kind of solution that honored different priorities without forcing false choices between impact and sustainability. As these exploratory discussions evolved into concrete partnership planning, I found myself appreciating my father's business acumen from a new perspective, not as the intimidating standard setter of my childhood, but as an experienced strategist whose skills complemented my own. 3 months after his cardiac procedure, we formalized the collaboration between Innovate Health and the Evans Foundation. The partnership would enable deployment of our platform in healthcare facilities across 3 countries initially, with potential expansion based on demonstrated impact metrics. The evening after signing the Memorandum of Understanding, my father invited me to dinner at the small Italian restaurant near the harbor that had been his favorite for decades. As we settled at the corner table he always requested, I noted how his physical appearance had changed since his health crisis. Thinner but somehow more vibrant, his movements more deliberate, but his eyes clearer. "I wanted to celebrate today's agreement properly," he said after our orders were placed. "Not just the Foundation collaboration, though that's certainly significant, but the larger meaning behind it." "Which is?" I prompted when he paused. "The integration of different kinds of success," he replied thoughtfully. For most of my life, I've separated business achievement from personal fulfillment, professional legacy from family relationships, treated them as distinct categories, requiring different approaches. He gestured toward the window, where harbor lights reflected on dark water. "Your grandfather tried to tell me this was a false division. That meaningful achievement integrates purpose across all aspects of life. I wasn't ready to hear it then." I considered his words carefully. "And now?" "Now I understand that what you've built with Innovate Health represents exactly that integration. Technology that serves practical needs while honoring personal values. Business success that advances human welfare. Professional achievement that doesn't require compartmentalizing who you are and what matters to you. The insight demonstrated how profoundly my father's perspective had shifted, not just about my specific accomplishments, but about the nature of meaningful success itself. "The family has noticed the change in you," I observed. "Rebecca mentioned it last week." He smiled slightly. "Heart attacks have a certain clarifying effect on one's priorities, though I'd prefer others find less dramatic paths to similar insights." Our conversation continued through dinner, touching on business strategy, family dynamics, healthcare innovation, and philosophical questions about purpose and legacy. The artificial barriers that had once constrained our interactions, his rigid expectations, my defensive withholding, had dissolved, allowing genuine exchange between two people with different perspectives but shared values. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my father paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said at the reunion, about building Innovate Health for yourself, not for family approval. That was the crucial difference between your path and the ones your sister and cousins followed." I nodded, curious where this observation was leading. "You created something authentic because you weren't building it to fit external expectations," he continued. "There's profound wisdom in that approach. Wisdom I wished I had recognized sooner, both for your sake and my own." As we walked toward the parking area, Boston's nighttime skyline illuminated behind us, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the family disappointment tolerated at holiday gatherings, to the entrepreneur whose bank statement had silenced a room of critics. From the daughter seeking validation to the business leader comfortable in her own accomplishment. From estrangement to collaboration founded on mutual respect rather than obligation. The transformation hadn't occurred in a single revelatory moment, despite the dramatic confrontation at the reunion dinner. It had developed through consistent commitment to authentic purpose, through the gradual accumulation of impact that couldn't be dismissed, through the creation of value that spoke for itself rather than seeking external validation. Perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that true success isn't measured by momentary vindication or even financial achievement, but by building something meaningful that aligns with your deepest values. The bank statement had opened the door to recognition, but the purpose behind those numbers was what ultimately mattered. And as my father and I parted with plans to continue our collaborative work the following week, I recognized that the greatest wealth I possessed wasn't reflected in financial statements or investment portfolios. It was the freedom to create impact on my own terms, guided by purpose rather than others' expectations. A currency far more valuable than anything that could silence a room of critics, no matter how satisfying that moment had been. 6 months. After my father's cardiac event, Innovate Health had entered a new phase of growth that few could have predicted. Our partnership with the Evans Foundation had opened doors to international deployment that might otherwise have taken years to access. The pilot programs in 3 African nations were demonstrating promising early results, with rural clinics reporting dramatic improvements in medication safety and clinical documentation efficiency. The Cambridge headquarters now occupied 3 floors instead of 1, with specialized teams focused on regional adaptations, regulatory compliance for different healthcare systems, and culturally appropriate implementation protocols. Our staff had grown from the original team of 12 dedicated innovators to over 200 professionals, united by the mission to make healthcare technology work for all providers, not just those with abundant resources. What hadn't changed was our core approach, building from the ground up with the actual users in mind, creating systems that adapted to existing workflows rather than forcing providers to conform to rigid technological demands. This philosophy, once dismissed as idealistic by industry veterans, had become our defining competitive advantage, and the reason healthcare facilities with limited resources consistently chose our platform over larger competitors' offerings. On a bright spring morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare for a significant announcement. The leadership team had been planning this event for weeks, ensuring every detail aligned with our company values and vision for the future. As I reviewed my notes in the still quiet conference room, Zoe appeared in the doorway with 2 coffee cups. "Thought you might need this," she said, placing one in front of me. "You've been here since 5, according to security." I accepted the coffee gratefully. Final review of the presentation. Today's announcement changes everything going forward. Zoe took the seat beside me, her expression thoughtful. 5 years ago, we were working out of your apartment, subsisting on ramen and determination. Now we're about to announce the largest rural healthcare technology initiative in history. She shook her head slightly. Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come. That makes 2 of us, I admitted. Remember when we couldn't afford proper development servers and kept having to restart my old laptop when it overheated during testing? She laughed. Or when we pitched to that first investor group and they asked if we had any adults on our executive team. These shared memories of our humble beginnings served as powerful reminders of the journey, not just the destination. Every step, every struggle, every moment of doubt had contributed to building something that was now transforming healthcare delivery for communities often forgotten by technological innovation. By 9 o'clock, the office was buzzing with energy. Staff members who typically worked remotely had come in for the special announcement. The expanded atrium area had been arranged with chairs for all employees, with video conferencing set up for our teams in other locations. At the front of the room, a simple podium stood before a screen displaying our company logo. The stylized IH, representing both our name and our mission to innovate healthcare with integrity and purpose. At precisely 9:30, I stepped to the podium, surveying the assembled team that had made our vision reality. Their faces reflected the diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives that had enriched our approach from the beginning. Clinical, professionals who understood healthcare workflows, technology specialists who could translate that understanding into functional systems, implementation experts who ensured our solutions worked in real-world settings. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice carrying easily through the excellent acoustics. "Thank you for being here today, both in person and virtually connecting from around the world. What we're announcing represents the culmination of our collective efforts and the beginning of an exciting new chapter for Innovate Health." I paused, taking in the attentive expressions. Some had been with us since the earliest days, remembering the struggles and setbacks. Others had joined more recently, attracted by our growing reputation for meaningful innovation. All were essential parts of the ecosystem we had created. 5 years ago, Innovate Health began with a simple but powerful question. Why can't healthcare technology work better for everyone, especially those with the fewest resources? That question, born from personal loss and professional frustration, has guided every decision we've made since. Today, I'm proud to announce that our question has resonated far beyond what we initially imagined possible. I nodded to Elena, our head of product, who activated the presentation. The screen displayed a world map with highlighted regions across 5 continents. The Global Health Access Initiative that we've been developing in partnership with the Evans Foundation and the World Health Organization is now officially launching. This 3-year implementation program will bring our platform to over 5,000 underserved healthcare facilities across 27 countries. A ripple of excitement moved through the audience. While the leadership team had been involved in planning this initiative for months, the full scale and scope had been kept confidential until final agreements were secured. This represents the largest deployment of safety-focused healthcare technology ever undertaken for resource-limited settings. The consortium of funding partners, including private foundations, government agencies, and international development organizations, has committed $157 million to ensure these facilities receive not just the technology, but the training, support, and infrastructure needed to implement it effectively. I advance to the next slide, showing the anticipated impact metrics. Based on our existing deployment data, we project this initiative will prevent approximately 345,000 serious medication errors annually, reduce documentation time by 42% for clinical staff, and improve critical communication in care transitions by over 60%. In human terms, that means thousands of lives saved, tens of thousands of harmful events prevented, and millions of hours returned to direct patient care rather than administrative burden. The room had fallen into attentive silence, the magnitude of what we were undertaking settling over the assembled team. This wasn't just a business milestone or growth opportunity. It was the fulfillment of the purpose that had driven us from the beginning. I want to emphasize that this initiative would not be possible without every person in this room and connected virtually. From our earliest developers who built the core architecture with scalability in mind, to our implementation specialists who refined our training approach for diverse settings, to our regulatory team who navigated complex compliance requirements across multiple jurisdictions. Every contribution has been essential. I continued describing key aspects of the initiative, the implementation timeline, the regional adaptation teams being established, the ongoing research partnership with academic institutions to measure and publish outcomes. Throughout the presentation, I emphasized that this expansion would remain true to our founding principles, building technology that served users' actual needs, prioritizing patient safety over administrative convenience, ensuring accessibility for resource-limited providers. As we enter this new phase, I concluded, we remain guided by the same purpose that started our journey. Technology should serve people, not the other way around. Healthcare innovation should reach those who need it most, not just those who can pay the most. And business success should be measured not just by financial growth, but by meaningful impact on human lives. The announcement was met with sustained applause, not the perfunctory kind that often accompanies corporate presentations, but the genuine expression of people united by shared purpose and proud of collective achievement. As the formal presentation concluded and teams began breaking into implementation planning groups, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed by the distance we had traveled from that first prototype built with my grandmother's inheritance. Zoe appeared, at my side as I gathered my notes. "Impressive announcement," she said with characteristic understatement, "though you neglected to mention one significant detail." I raised an eyebrow questioningly. "You didn't tell them about the acquisition. Offers you turned down to maintain our independence and mission focus." 3 offers that would have made you personally wealthy beyond imagination, but might have compromised what we're announcing today. Her observation caught me off guard. That wasn't relevant to today's announcement. "Wasn't it?" she challenged, gently. The fact that our founder consistently prioritized mission over personal enrichment has shaped our entire corporate culture. It's why we attract people who care about impact over stock options, why we've maintained focus when competitors chase market trends. Your choices created the environment where today's announcement became possible. Before I could respond, we were approached by Malcolm Thompson from the Evans Foundation, who had attended the announcement as one of our key initiative partners. "Remarkable presentation," he said warmly. The foundation board was thoroughly impressed with the implementation roadmap. Richard sends his apologies for not being here personally. He's meeting with the European consortium partners to finalize their participation details. My father's continued involvement with Innovate Health through the foundation had evolved into a productive professional relationship that honored appropriate boundaries while leveraging genuine synergies. His extensive international business network had proven invaluable in navigating the complex partnerships required for global expansion. "Please convey my thanks for his efforts with the European partners," I replied. "Their participation significantly expands our implementation capacity." As Malcolm moved on to discuss technical details with our international deployment team, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my relationship with my father had transformed since the family reunion revelation. The bank statement that silenced the room had opened a door, but what developed afterward had far exceeded that moment of vindication. My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, my sister Rebecca, navigating through the crowded atrium with characteristic poise. Her presence at company headquarters was unprecedented. Though our personal relationship had improved since the reunion, she had maintained professional distance from Innovate Health. "Impressive operation you've built here," she observed as she reached me. "I watched the announcement on the live stream and decided to come congratulate you in person." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of the gesture. "This is a pleasant surprise." Rebecca glanced around at the energetic teams now scattered throughout the atrium, engaged in animated planning discussions. "It's different than I imagined," she admitted. "I always pictured sterile corporate offices with everyone in identical business attire. This feels more like a university research center crossed with a creative agency." Her observation was accurate. We had deliberately cultivated an environment that reflected our values rather than corporate conventions. Open collaborative spaces, casual dress code, visual reminders of our impact in healthcare settings around the world. The physical space embodied our approach to innovation: practical, accessible, human-centered. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. "See what we actually do here?" For the next hour, I guided Rebecca through various departments, introducing her to team members and explaining key aspects of our technology and implementation approach. Her questions revealed genuine curiosity rather than the polite interest of obligatory family support. When we reached the product development lab where new features were being tested with actual healthcare providers via video connections, she paused to observe the collaborative process. "This isn't at all what I thought you were doing," she said quietly. "I had this vague notion of website development or app creation, but this is transformative healthcare infrastructure." Her acknowledgement carried particular weight coming from someone who had witnessed my early struggles and initial family rejection. Rebecca had never been openly dismissive like some relatives, but she had aligned with our parents' perspective that my path was impractically idealistic compared to her own conventional success trajectory. "What changed your mind?" I asked, as we continued toward my office. "About coming to see firsthand what we're doing?" She considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "Dad, partly. Since his health crisis, he's spoken about your work with such clarity and respect. But also, I've been following the coverage of Innovate Health's impact in medical journals. My hospital system is considering implementing your platform for their rural satellite facilities." This was news to me. The Boston Integrated Health Network is evaluating our platform. They're one of the most technologically conservative systems in the region. Rebecca nodded. "Their current technology is creating significant problems, especially for the smaller community hospitals they've acquired. When your company came up in the evaluation committee meeting, I realized I knew virtually nothing about what my own sister had built despite its growing industry recognition." We reached my office, a modest corner space with glass walls maintaining visual connection to the team while providing acoustic privacy when needed. Unlike traditional executive offices designed to impress with size and furnishings, mine was functional and welcoming, featuring healthcare accessibility maps rather than corporate awards. "I've learned something important watching you these past months," Rebecca said as she took a seat in the comfortable visitor chair. "Success looks different than I was taught to recognize." "How so?" I asked, curious about this unexpected philosophical turn. "Our family always measured achievement in very specific terms: prestigious institutions, organizational hierarchy, visible wealth, social position. I followed that template exactly, and by those metrics, I've succeeded." She gestured toward the active workspace visible through the glass walls. But what you've built here transcends those limitations. It's success defined by meaningful impact, by solving real problems that matter. That's harder to quantify on a balance sheet, but ultimately more significant. Her insight demonstrated a remarkable evolution in perspective for someone who had previously embraced the Evans family success template without question. The traditional metrics still matter for sustainability, I acknowledged. We monitor financial health rigorously, but they're means rather than ends, tools that enable our core purpose rather than defining our worth. Rebecca's expression shifted slightly, revealing something vulnerable beneath her typical composure. I've been thinking about purpose more lately. My position at the hospital is objectively prestigious, but sometimes I wonder what unique value I'm actually creating, whether I'm building something meaningful or just occupying a role others defined. This admission, so contrary to the image of unwavering confidence she had always projected, created an opening for authentic connection unlike any we had shared since childhood. It's never too late to reorient around purpose, I offered. Carefully. The infrastructure you've already built, your medical training, your administrative position, your professional network, all provide foundation for meaningful impact. The question becomes what specific problem you're uniquely positioned to address. Our conversation continued for another hour, shifting from philosophical reflection to practical consideration of how her position within a major healthcare system might enable specific improvements she found personally meaningful. For the first time in our adult relationship, we engaged as supportive equals rather than comparative competitors, each acknowledging the other's unique path and potential contribution. When Rebecca eventually departed to return to her hospital duties, she paused at the door with uncharacteristic hesitation. I'm proud of you, Meredith, not because of the banking statement that shocked everyone at the reunion, but because of what it represents, the courage to pursue vision that others couldn't yet see. Her words carried healing power beyond any financial validation. The relationship that had been most damaged by our family's comparative assessment was finding new foundation in mutual respect and genuine appreciation of difference. The remainder of that milestone day passed in a blur of implementation planning, media interviews about the global initiative, and coordination with international partners. By evening, I found myself alone in the office, reviewing the day's events, with a sense of both accomplishment and perspective. My phone chimed with a text message from my father. Followed the announcement livestream. Extraordinary achievement. Would like to discuss potential pharmaceutical safety extension when you have time. His communication style had evolved alongside our relationship, respectful of boundaries, focused on substantive contribution, balanced between personal pride and professional collaboration. The difficult conversations following his health crisis had established new patterns that honored both our familial connection and professional independence. As I prepared to leave the office, I noticed an envelope on my desk that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a handwritten note from Elena, our head of product, who had been with the company since our earliest prototype. 5 years ago, I left a prestigious tech firm to join a startup that couldn't guarantee my next paycheck, but promised meaningful work addressing problems that mattered. Today, I watched as that startup announced an initiative that will transform healthcare for millions of people who have been systematically overlooked by technology innovation. Thank you for creating space where purpose and profession align. Elena. Her words captured what financial statements and growth metrics could never reflect. The human impact of building an organization guided by authentic purpose rather than conventional definitions of success. On the drive home, I reflected on the journey from family disappointment to recognized innovator. The bank statement that silenced my critics at the reunion had provided momentary satisfaction, but the enduring fulfillment came from what those numbers represented. The freedom to create meaningful impact aligned with deep personal values. The family that had once dismissed my path as impractical idealism now acknowledged its validity, not because financial success had proven them wrong, but because purpose-driven achievement had expanded their understanding of what success could mean. The reconciliation wasn't about vindication, but about transcending the limited metrics that had constrained all our perspectives. As I entered my Cambridge apartment overlooking the river, I was struck by how little my personal lifestyle had changed despite Innovate Health's growth and my own financial security. Unlike many founders who embraced extravagant consumption with early success, I had maintained modest personal habits while focusing resources on the company's mission and impact. This wasn't sacrifice but alignment, using wealth as tool for purpose rather than validation. On my desk sat the framed photograph that had accompanied me from the very beginning, my grandfather in his hospital bed, smiling despite the medical equipment surrounding him during his final illness. His unnecessary death from preventable medication error had catalyzed my journey, transforming personal loss into purposeful innovation that now protected others from similar tragedy. "We did it, Grandpa," I said quietly to the image. "Your legacy extends far beyond what anyone imagined." The evening news played quietly in the background, eventually reaching the business segment where Innovate Health's global initiative announcement was featured prominently. The reporter's description emphasized the innovative partnership structure and unprecedented scale of implementation for underserved healthcare settings. In a sector typically driven by profit margins and return on investment metrics, the reporter concluded, Innovate Health continues to demonstrate that purpose-driven innovation can create both significant business success and meaningful social impact. Founder and CEO Meredith Evans has built what industry observers increasingly describe as a new model for healthcare technology development, one that starts with actual user needs rather than market positioning. The external validation was gratifying but secondary to the internal knowledge that we had remained true to our founding purpose through every growth phase and scaling challenge. The bank statement that had silenced my family's criticism was merely one indicator of success and not the most meaningful one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: implementation complexities across diverse healthcare systems, regulatory hurdles in multiple jurisdictions, the continuous work of evolving our technology to meet emerging needs. But the foundation remained solid, a company built on authentic purpose, guided by impact rather than expectation, measuring success by lives improved rather than merely dollars accumulated. The journey from family disappointment to healthcare innovator had transformed not just my professional trajectory but my understanding of what constitutes meaningful achievement. The bank statement had opened doors to renewed family relationships, but the purpose behind those numbers had created something far more valuable: a legacy of positive impact that would continue long after any financial validation had faded from memory. As I prepared for the next day's work, I felt profound gratitude, not just for the success we had achieved, but for the early rejection that had forced me to build something authentic rather than seeking external approval. Sometimes the greatest gift is the freedom to create without the constraint of others' limited expectations. A truth I had lived but only recently fully understood. The bank statement had silenced the room, but the purpose behind it had changed the world, starting with my own. 18 months after announcing the Global Health Access Initiative, I found myself standing at the entrance of a small rural clinic in northern Tanzania. The modest single-story building with its metal roof and simple concrete walls housed a medical facility serving over 20,000 people scattered across several remote villages. Unlike the gleaming hospitals of Boston or the tech-enabled medical centers of urban America, this clinic operated with minimal resources and a dedicated staff doing remarkable work despite persistent limitations. Dr. Amina Okoro, the clinic's medical director, greeted me with a warm handshake and professional enthusiasm. "Ms. Evans, welcome to Majengo Health Center. We've been using your system for 11 months now, and I'm eager to show you the impact it's made for our patients and staff." She led me through the facility with evident pride, pointing out the simple tablet computers now installed at each clinical workstation, devices that connected to Innovate Health's platform through the solar-powered satellite internet system we had installed as part of the initiative. The technology was deliberately unobtrusive, integrating into the existing workflow rather than dominating the space. "Before your system," Dr. Okoro explained as we entered the small pharmacy area, "medication errors were a constant concern. We serve patients who speak 5 different local languages, many with limited literacy. Our medication records were paper-based and frequently incomplete due to staffing constraints." She gestured toward the pharmacy technician who was scanning a medication barcode with a handheld device connected to our platform. "Now, every prescription is automatically checked against the patient's complete history. The system flags potential interactions, adjusts dosing based on the patient's kidney function and weight, and provides printed instructions in the patient's preferred language." As we continued through the clinic, Dr. Okoro introduced me to nurses, community health workers, and administrative staff, each describing how the platform had transformed their daily work. The clinical documentation system, designed specifically for low-resource settings with intermittent connectivity, had reduced their administrative burden while improving continuity of care. The scheduling module helped manage the complex rotation of visiting specialists who served multiple facilities across the region. "The most important change isn't visible in the technology itself," Dr. Okoro noted, as we observed a consultation between a nurse and elderly patient. "It's in the time returned to direct patient care. Our clinical staff now spends 47% more time with patients because they're not struggling with paperwork and fragmented records." We concluded our tour in the clinic's small conference room, where Dr. Okoro presented comprehensive data on the facility's outcomes since implementing our platform. Medication errors had decreased by 73%. Follow-up compliance for chronic conditions had improved by 61%. Staff retention had increased significantly, with several nurses citing the improved working conditions as their reason for remaining in rural practice rather than seeking urban positions. "These numbers represent real lives," Dr. Okoro emphasized, her expression both serious and hopeful. "Children who received correct medication dosages, elderly patients whose chronic conditions are now properly managed, healthcare workers who can use their training to heal rather than battle administrative chaos." Her words crystallized what all our metrics and growth statistics sometimes obscured: the human impact behind the technology we had created. This small clinic, thousands of miles from our Cambridge headquarters, embodied the purpose that had driven Innovate Health from its inception, making healthcare technology work for those who needed it most. "Your system succeeded where others failed, because you designed it for our reality, not for an imagined ideal environment," Dr. Okoro concluded. "You built technology that serves people in the circumstances where they actually work, not technology that demands people adapt to its requirements." Her assessment precisely captured the philosophy that had differentiated our approach from the beginning, and vindicated the vision that my family had once dismissed as impractical idealism: the unrealistic focus on user needs over market. Conventions had created a solution uniquely suited to environments that conventional developers had overlooked or underserved. That evening, I joined Dr. Okoro and her staff for dinner at her home, a simple but comfortable residence adjacent to the clinic. The meal featured local specialties prepared by her sister, who had moved to the village to help support Dr. Okoro's demanding work schedule. The conversation flowed naturally between professional observations and personal stories, creating connections that transcended our different backgrounds and experiences. "What made you focus on rural healthcare technology?" Dr. Okoro asked as we enjoyed sweet chai tea after the meal. "Most American companies target wealthy hospitals and insurance systems. The resource-limited settings like ours are usually afterthoughts, if considered at all." The question invited reflection on the journey that had brought me to this moment. It began with personal loss, I explained. My grandfather died from a preventable medication error because different parts of the healthcare system weren't communicating effectively. That experience showed me how technology failures directly impact human lives. I described the early days of Innovate Health, the prototype built with my grandmother's inheritance, the rejection from conventional investors who couldn't see beyond established market patterns, the dedicated team who believed in our vision despite limited resources and significant challenges. The conventional wisdom said that healthcare technology had to be complex and expensive to be effective, I continued. But we found that simplicity, interoperability, and user-centered design actually created more impact, especially in settings where resources are constrained and every minute matters. Dr. Okoro nodded with understanding. When you have abundant resources, you can sometimes succeed despite inefficient systems. When resources are limited, good design becomes essential, not optional. She smiled reflectively. Perhaps that's why your approach resonated here so effectively. You built for the reality of constraints rather than the luxury of excess. Her insight captured something fundamental about our development philosophy: the recognition that limitations could drive innovation rather than restrict it. By designing within constraints rather than ignoring them, we had created technology that worked where other systems failed. Your family didn't understand this vision. Initially, Dr. Okoro asked, referencing a part of my story I had briefly mentioned. They saw it as impractical, I admitted. They measured success by conventional metrics, prestigious institutions, hierarchical advancement, visible wealth. Building technology for overlooked healthcare settings didn't fit their template for achievement. And now? Now they see it differently, I said, thinking of how dramatically perceptions had shifted since the family reunion revelation. Not just because the company became financially successful, but because they've witnessed the meaningful impact behind those numbers. The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on healthcare challenges, technology opportunities, and personal reflections on purpose-driven work. As I prepared to depart for my hotel, Dr. Okoro presented me with a simple hand-woven basket made by local artisans. A small token of our appreciation, she said warmly, though it cannot possibly represent the thousands of lives your work has touched here. The gesture, genuine and understated, carried more significance than any formal award or recognition. This was impact that couldn't be quantified in financial statements or investor presentations, the human difference made possible by technology designed with purpose and implemented with understanding. The following morning, I joined a video conference connecting our Tanzania implementation team with colleagues at Cambridge headquarters. The weekly coordination call included clinical advisors, technical specialists, and local implementation experts working together to refine and improve the platform based on real-world experience. The medication labeling module needs adjustment for the nomadic communities in the northern region, reported Esther, our local implementation lead. Many patients travel between seasonal locations and access care at different facilities. We need to ensure their medication information translates clearly across dialects and facilities. What followed was exactly the kind of collaborative problem-solving that had defined Innovate Health's approach from the beginning. Clinical experts describing actual patient needs, technical team members proposing potential solutions, implementation, specialists evaluating practicality in specific contexts. No single perspective dominated. Solutions emerged from the integration of diverse expertise and experience. Zoe, joining from Cambridge, summarized the action items and next steps with her characteristic efficiency. We'll have the language adaptation team prioritize the northern dialect variants, targeting deployment within 3 weeks. Esther, can your team validate the translations with community health workers before we finalize? The coordination demonstrated how our organization had scaled without losing the collaborative culture that drove effective innovation. Despite growing to over 500 employees worldwide, We maintained the integrated approach that had characterized our earliest days working from my apartment with the initial prototype. After the call concluded, I spent the day visiting 2 additional healthcare facilities in the region: a district hospital utilizing our platform for specialty care coordination, and a mobile clinic using our system's offline capabilities to provide continuity of care in remote areas without reliable connectivity. Each setting revealed different aspects of the technology's impact and identified opportunities for continued improvement. That evening, as I prepared for the journey back to Boston, I received an unexpected message from my cousin Emma, the family golden child whose perfect adherence to the Evans success template had once been held up as the standard I should aspire to meet. "Just saw your feature in Healthcare Innovation Journal," her message read. "The initiative's outcomes are remarkable. I'm heading a hospital administration committee on rural outreach, and we'd love to learn from your implementation approach. Would you be willing to consult?" The request represented yet another evolution in my family's perception, from dismissing my vision as impractical idealism to now seeking my expertise for their own professional initiatives. The transformation wasn't just about acknowledging financial success, but recognizing the substantive value of our development philosophy and implementation methodology. I replied with professional courtesy, suggesting that Emma connect with our healthcare systems team to discuss potential collaboration. The boundary between family relations and business engagement remained important. Respect had been earned, but appropriate separation still maintained the integrity of both spheres. The long flight from Tanzania to Boston provided rare, uninterrupted hours for reflection. As the aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet, I reviewed the comprehensive implementation data from the first 18 months of the Global Health Access Initiative. The numbers told a compelling story. Over 3,000 healthcare facilities now actively using our platform across 23 countries. More than 17 million patient interactions safely managed through the system. Medication errors reduced by an average of 68% across all implementation sites. But behind these statistics were the human experiences I had witnessed firsthand. Dr. Okoro's clinic functioning more effectively despite resource constraints. Nurses able to focus on patient care rather than administrative burden. Rural communities receiving safer, more coordinated healthcare despite geographic and economic challenges. This impact, tangible, meaningful, aligned with our founding purpose, provided deeper satisfaction than any financial validation or family recognition. The bank statement that had silenced my critics at the reunion had opened doors to renewed relationships and professional respect. But the purpose behind those numbers had created the lasting fulfillment that drove continued innovation. The aircraft began its descent into Boston, the city lights emerging through scattered clouds. My phone chimed with a message from my father. "Dinner tomorrow evening? Want to hear about Tanzania firsthand? Your mother asked me to remind you the Harvard Medical School benefit is Saturday. They're recognizing Innovate Health's contribution to their global health education program." The invitation reflected how thoroughly our relationship had evolved since his health crisis 2 years earlier. Our reconnection had progressed from tentative reconciliation to genuine engagement, professional, respect complementing personal rapprochement. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Decades of established patterns couldn't be entirely rewritten in 2 years. But the authentic progress represented healing I once thought impossible. The Harvard Medical School recognition held particular significance given my family's traditional reverence for prestigious institutions. That Innovate Health now received acknowledgement from the very establishments once considered the only valid arbiters of success demonstrated how thoroughly the narrative had shifted, not just within my family but within the broader systems that had initially dismissed our approach as impractically idealistic. Landing at Boston Logan Airport in the early evening, I was met by Nadeem, our CFO, who had become both trusted colleague and valued friend over the years of building Innovate Health together. "Welcome back," he greeted me warmly. "How was Tanzania?" "Transformative," I replied honestly. Seeing our technology integrated into settings with such significant constraints reinforces everything we've believed about user-centered design. I've got implementation insights that will definitely influence our next development cycle. During the drive to Cambridge, Nadim updated me on key developments that had occurred during my 2-week field visit. Progress on regulatory approvals for our European expansion, preliminary discussions with a major pharmaceutical company, interested in integrating our medication safety protocols into their global distribution system, and continued interest from acquisition suitors despite our clear commitment to remaining independent. Medcore Systems has increased their offer again, he noted, referencing our most persistent potential acquirer. 54% premium over current valuation, guaranteed positions for all executive team members, and operational autonomy for at least 4 years. Still not interested, I replied, the decision requiring no deliberation. Our independence remains essential to fulfilling our mission, especially as we expand globally. Nadim nodded, unsurprised. That's what I told them, though their CEO suggested I remind you that their resources could potentially accelerate international deployment significantly. At what cost to our development philosophy and implementation approach? We've built something that works precisely because we're not constrained by quarterly earnings expectations or conventional market assumptions. That freedom to prioritize impact over immediate returns has created our competitive advantage. The conversation shifted to preparations for the upcoming board meeting, where we would present comprehensive data from the Global Health Access Initiative's first phase and outline strategic priorities for the next 2 years. Our board had evolved alongside the company, now including healthcare leaders from diverse global contexts, alongside traditional investors and governance experts. Arriving at my Cambridge apartment, I found a small package waiting at my door. Delivery from my mother, according to the elegant handwriting on the attached note. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. My grandfather in his early 30s, standing proudly before the manufacturing facility he had built from humble beginnings into a significant regional enterprise. The accompanying note read simply, "Your grandfather approached success differently than the narrative we maintained. Thought you might appreciate this image of him at your age, building something meaningful that others initially dismissed. See you Saturday at the Harvard event. Love, Mom." The unexpected gesture carried significance beyond the photograph itself. My mother had rarely acknowledged the parallels between my entrepreneurial journey and my grandfather's non-traditional path. That she now recognized this connection represented yet another evolution in my family's understanding, not just of my specific achievements, but of how success itself could be defined and pursued. The following morning at Innovate Health headquarters, I facilitated a knowledge-sharing session with the development team, translating observations from Tanzania into specific improvement opportunities for our platform. The collaborative discussion exemplified our continued commitment to user-centered design despite the company's growth. Senior executives still engaged directly with implementation contexts. Technical solutions still emerged from actual user experiences rather than abstract market analysis. The offline synchronization protocol works well for most settings, I explained, referencing the capability that allowed our system to function in areas with intermittent connectivity. But the nomadic communities present unique challenges. Their care continuity depends on seamless data transfer between facilities they might visit only seasonally. Elena, our head of product, immediately connected this observation to technical possibilities. We could enhance the patient identification module to incorporate more flexible recognition parameters. Maybe integrate the immunization record scanning capability we developed for the Refugee Health Initiative in Lebanon. The technical team engaged enthusiastically, proposing solutions that balanced innovation with practical implementation considerations. This approach, starting with actual user needs rather than technology capabilities, had defined our development philosophy from the beginning, creating systems that worked effectively in real-world healthcare settings rather than just impressive demonstrations. As the session concluded, I was approached by Marcus, a relatively new addition to our engineering team who had joined from one of the industry's dominant players. "I need to tell you something," he said when most colleagues had departed. I was skeptical when I joined Innovate Health 6 months ago. At my previous company, we talked about user-centered design but rarely practiced it meaningfully. I thought the same would be true here. Nice philosophy, different reality. He gestured toward the whiteboard covered with implementation insights and potential solutions. But this is the real thing. Senior leadership engaging directly with frontline implementation challenges. Engineers who actually understand the clinical context their code will serve. I've learned more about effective healthcare technology development in 6 months here than in 5 years at my previous position. His observation captured something essential about the culture we had deliberately cultivated: the integration of diverse expertise, the continuous learning from implementation experience, the consistent prioritization of impact over conventional industry practices. "That's the highest compliment you could offer," I replied sincerely. "Maintaining that approach as we grow is our most important priority, more important than any financial metric or market penetration goal." The remainder of the day involved a series of meetings with various teams, reviewing progress on regulatory submissions for our European expansion, discussing preliminary findings from our research partnership with academic medical centers, strategizing communication approaches for the upcoming Healthcare Technology Conference, where we would present comprehensive outcomes data from the Global Health Access Initiative. By late afternoon, I was preparing for dinner with my father, when Zoe knocked on my office door, her expression suggesting significant news. "The Powell Project Final Outcomes Report just arrived," she announced, referring to the healthcare initiative that had precipitated my departure from Bennett Industries 7 years earlier. "Remember that governmental study examining long-term impacts of various sustainability approaches across the demonstration sites?" I nodded, curious about her evident excitement. The Powell Project had been a pivotal moment in my professional journey, the situation where standing firm on ethical principles had cost me my position at my father's company, but ultimately led to founding Innovate Health. They evaluated all implementation sites across multiple dimensions: environmental sustainability, community economic impact, health outcomes, and long-term operational viability, Zoe continued. "Guess which approach demonstrated the strongest performance across all metrics?" "The remediation inclusive model we advocated for," I surmised based on her expression. She nodded, handing me the executive summary. The report specifically cites the comprehensive approach that included upfront soil remediation as the most successful implementation strategy. Projects that delayed addressing contamination issues encountered significant complications that compromised both environmental outcomes and economic sustainability. The validation carried personal significance beyond professional affirmation. The ethical stand that had initially appeared career-damaging, insisting on transparency about contamination issues in the original proposal against my father's guidance, had proven not just morally sound, but practically superior. The comprehensive approach I had advocated had created better outcomes across all relevant metrics. This external validation completed a circle that had begun with professional rejection and family dismissal. The vision once labeled impractically idealistic had demonstrated its effectiveness not just through Innovate Health's success, but through independent verification of the principles that had guided my earliest professional decisions. That evening, sharing dinner with my father at his favorite restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor, I mentioned the Powell Project findings. His response surprised me with its candor and self-reflection. "I've been waiting for those results," he admitted. "Not because I needed external validation of your judgment. Your success with Innovate Health settled that question long ago, but because I wanted confirmation of something I've suspected since my health crisis. That integrity and practical effectiveness are ultimately aligned rather than opposed." His observation reflected how profoundly his perspective had evolved since our confrontational departure years earlier. The executive who had once framed ethical considerations as naive obstacles to business success now recognized the practical value of principled decision-making, a transformation catalyzed by personal health challenges, but sustained through genuine reconsideration of fundamental assumptions. The business world often creates false dichotomies, he continued thoughtfully. Profit versus purpose, efficiency versus humanity, practical reality versus ethical idealism. But the most successful enterprises, truly successful, not just financially dominant, transcend these artificial divisions. We spent the remainder of dinner discussing Innovate Health's Tanzania implementation, my father asking insightful questions about both technical challenges and cultural adaptation considerations. His genuine interest in the substance of our work, not just its financial outcomes or market positioning, demonstrated the authentic nature of our reconciliation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.